I think you'll find that you're in the wrong seat, and I'd appreciate it if you'd move your ass before you hold up the entire damn plane." The voice that sliced through the stale, recycled air of the first-class cabin was as sharp and cold as shattered glass. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a deadly quiet, a simmering intensity that made heads turn and conversations die. What do you think you would do in a situation like this, when someone, for no reason at all, decides you don't belong? Before we dive into the chaos that's about to unfold on Ascend Air Flight 928, let me know in the comments below what your first move would be. And while you're there, do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel, because you are about to witness an act of revenge so epic, so perfectly executed, it will leave you breathless. Julian Vance stood in the narrow aisle, his shadow falling over the woman who had commandeered his seat. He was a tall man, built like a linebacker who'd traded the gridiron for a boardroom, but he held himself with a deceptive stillness. His attire was the uniform of the modern tech mogul, a worn, charcoal-gray hoodie, faded black jeans, and a pair of unassuming sneakers that cost more than the tailored suit of the man in the row behind him. His boarding pass, a flimsy piece of paper clutched in his hand, clearly designated him as the rightful occupant of Seat 2A. The woman, Carolyn Sterling, didn't bother to look up. Her attention was surgically focused on her phone, her thumb flicking through images of sprawling Beverly Hills mansions with a bored entitlement. A massive diamond, the size of a quail's egg, glittered on her left hand, catching the cabin light and throwing tiny, arrogant rainbows across the plush leather. When she finally deigned to acknowledge his existence, she lifted her head slowly, her ice-blue eyes performing a glacial sweep of his form. It was a look he knew well, a visual calculus of wealth and status that, in her mind, he had just failed spectacularly. "Oh," she finally exhaled, the single syllable dripping with the bored condescension of old money. "I'm sure there's been a simple misunderstanding. Why don't you go speak with one of the flight attendants? I'm quite certain they can find a more suitable place for you." Julian was tired. It was a fatigue that went far beyond the physical drain of the 3-day tech summit in Austin he'd just headlined. It was a soul-deep weariness, an exhaustion born from a lifetime of having to justify his presence in rooms where he was the only black face. He had spent 72 hours under the fluorescent lights of conference halls and investor suites, patiently explaining the revolutionary potential of EtherTech's new AI logistics platform, his voice a calm river of data and projections in a sea of skeptical white faces. He had earned his success, built his empire from nothing but code and sheer force of will, but in moments like this, none of that seemed to matter. Here, in the hermetically sealed tube of an airplane, he was just a black man in a hoodie, and that, to Caroline Sterling, was a problem to be solved. "Ma'am," Julian said, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated with contained frustration. "There's no misunderstanding. This is Seat 2A. My boarding pass confirms it. This is my assigned seat." Carolyn's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched into twin crescents of disbelief. He saw it then, that familiar flicker in her eyes, a toxic cocktail of disdain and bewilderment. It was the look that silently screamed, "You don't belong here. How did you get in?" "Yes, I can see what your little paper says," she replied, waving a dismissive hand toward his boarding pass. "But mistakes happen, you know. I am an Ascend Air Diamond Medallion member. I've been one for 15 years. I always sit in this specific seat. I'm sure if you just explain the situation to the staff, they will sort it out in a way that is satisfactory for everyone." That word, satisfactory, hung in the air between them, heavy and poisoned. Julian felt its weight, the crushing burden of its unspoken meaning. Satisfactory for her. The coded language was a language he had been forced to become fluent in since his days on a scholarship at Stanford, through every venture capital pitch, through every hostile boardroom takeover. It was the language of exclusion, wrapped in the polite veneer of procedure. Behind him, the line of boarding passengers was beginning to bunch up. A low murmur of impatience rippled through the cabin. Some craned their necks, hungry for a bit of in-flight drama. Others studiously avoided looking, their faces buried in phones and magazines, broadcasting their desperate desire not to be involved. Julian subtly glanced at the watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe he'd bought himself after EtherTech went public, its intricate face mostly hidden by the sleeve of his hoodie. It wasn't about telling time. It was a grounding mechanism, a small private reminder of who he was and what he had built, a silent counter-argument to the woman in front of him. In the designer backpack slung over his shoulder was a laptop holding the keys to a digital kingdom. Patents that could disrupt global supply chains, contracts worth billions, the livelihoods of the 12,000 people he employed. But in this moment, none of that mattered. In this moment, to Caroline Sterling, he was just an obstacle. "I understand your loyalty to the airline," Julian said, his words measured, each one carefully chosen. "But this is my seat. I would appreciate it if you would check your own boarding pass and locate your correct seat." A laugh escaped Caroline's lips. It was a sharp, brittle sound, like ice cracking. "Oh, my dear man, I think you're the one who's confused. This is first class. This isn't—" She paused, letting her eyes drift over his casual clothes again, a surgeon examining a diseased specimen. "Well, it's not the place one typically finds people dressed for a jog in the park." The insult landed exactly as intended. It was a weapon she had wielded her entire life, the subtle, deniable shiv of classist and racist assumption. She was questioning not just his ticket, but his entire existence in this space of privilege. What Caroline couldn't possibly know, what no one on this airplane could fathom, was that Julian Vance was not just another passenger. 3 years prior, in a move that had sent shockwaves through the financial world, EtherTech had acquired a controlling interest in Ascend Air's parent company. A quiet, complex acquisition that left him, personally, as the majority owner of the airline. He owned 65% of everything: the planes, the gates, the routes, the brand, and the very seat Caroline Sterling was so stubbornly refusing to vacate. But Julian had learned a crucial lesson early in his career. Never reveal your power until you absolutely have to. It was better to let people reveal their true selves first, to see the ugliness they kept hidden when they believed there were no consequences. "I am not confused about a single thing," Julian replied, his voice losing its patient undertone and taking on a hard, resonant edge that made a few nearby passengers lower their phones. "This is my seat. I am asking you for the last time to move." Caroline's blue eyes narrowed. She was a queen on her throne, unaccustomed to being challenged by a commoner. Her voice dropped, taking on a tone of faux reasonableness that was more insulting than an outright shout. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it's over. I am not moving. I've been flying this airline since before you were probably born, and I know how this works. If there's been some kind of clerical error, I am confident that the airline will rectify it in a manner that respects its most loyal customers." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. He wasn't one of them. Therefore, he didn't deserve to be here, regardless of what his ticket said. It was the casual country club racism that she likely didn't even recognize in herself, a prejudice so ingrained it felt like simple common sense. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was probably Anya, his chief of staff, wondering why he hadn't boarded yet. There were urgent emails demanding his attention, decisions to be made that would ripple across continents. But all of that global commerce and technological innovation faded into a dull background hum. He was standing in the aisle of his own airplane, being told he didn't belong in a seat he didn't just pay for, but fundamentally owned, by a woman whose greatest accomplishment was likely marrying well, The moment stretched, thick with the unspoken history of a nation. The other first-class passengers had dropped all pretense of not watching. It was a spectator sport now, and they were all ringside. Some faces showed discomfort, others a morbid curiosity. A few, he noted with a familiar pang of resignation, wore faint smirks of approval, having already chosen their side based on nothing more than the color of his skin. Julian made his decision. He would not be the bigger person today. He would not de-escalate. He would not quietly move to another seat to keep the peace. Not this time. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was now imbued with a new weight, a quiet authority that finally made Caroline Sterling's smug smile falter. "I am not asking you again. Get out of my seat, now." Caroline Sterling's face, a carefully maintained mask of expensive creams and subtle cosmetic procedures, hardened into a grotesque caricature of indignation. Her Hermes Birkin bag sat on the empty seat beside her like a second passenger, a silent testament to her status. Shopping bags from Neiman Marcus and Tiffany & Co.'s were clustered around her feet, a barricade of luxury. Everything about her screamed ownership, not just of the seat, but of the entire world she inhabited. "I'm sorry, but I believe you're the one who is misunderstanding the situation," she clipped, her voice the auditory equivalent of a slamming door. "I am Carolyn Sterling. My husband is Edward Sterling of Sterling Capital. Perhaps you've heard of him? We're not just passengers, we're patrons. We are VIPs, and this seat was specifically requested upon booking." Julian remained unmoving in the aisle, a granite pillar against her tide of entitlement. He'd seen this performance 1,000 times in 1,000 different settings. The name drop, the appeal to a higher authority, the fundamental belief that rules were for little people. It was a power play, pure and simple. "Mrs. Sterling," Julian said, his voice dangerously calm, "I don't care if your husband is the King of England. Importance is not a boarding pass. This is seat 2A. That is what my ticket says, the one I paid for with my own money." Her laugh was a sharp, ugly bark that drew more unwanted attention. "Oh, darling, don't be so dramatic. Look around you. Does it look like a mistake was made? Honestly, when was the last time you were even in a first-class cabin?" The question was a deliberate, targeted strike, meant to shame and humiliate him into submission. Her eyes glinted, confident that he would now stammer an apology and retreat, tail between his legs. She was testing him, trying to see if he would crack under the weight of her social superiority. "I fly first class twice a week, Mrs. Sterling," Julian replied, his voice as smooth as polished onyx. "Usually on this exact route, and in the 5 years I've been a primary stakeholder in Ascend Air, I have never once encountered someone who believed their sense of entitlement trumped a legally assigned seat." Her smile froze on her face, the condescension curdling into confusion. She hadn't expected the quiet, unwavering confidence. She hadn't expected the pushback. He could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to recalibrate, to fit him into a neat little box that made sense to her. Her eyes scanned him again. The hoodie, the jeans, the calm, unblinking gaze, and found only contradictions. "Well, then you, of all people, should understand how things work," she snapped, her tone shifting from condescending to openly hostile. "Accommodations must sometimes be made. I have a very important gala I am attending in Los Angeles, and I specifically require a window seat on the port side of the aircraft. It is a matter of personal comfort and preparation. I am sure the airline can find another seat that is perfectly adequate for your needs." His phone buzzed again. He glanced down. A text from Anya. "Emergency board meeting scheduled for 4 p.m. PST. Absolutely need you on the ground by 2. Is there a problem?" A problem. That was the understatement of the century. He quickly typed back, "Minor delay on the tarmac. Handle the preliminary calls. I'll be there." When he looked up, Caroline was watching him, a new, mocking curiosity in her eyes. "Important business?" she asked, her tone laced with venomous sweetness. "I do hope we aren't keeping you from anything too critical." "As a matter of fact," Julian said, slipping his phone back into his jeans, "I do have important business, which is precisely why I would like to get settled in my assigned seat so that this aircraft can depart on schedule." The polite facade she had maintained was cracking, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. "Listen to me, and listen very carefully," she hissed, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but I am not falling for it. I see what you're doing. You're making a scene, causing a commotion, probably hoping for a voucher or a free upgrade on your next flight. Well, let me tell you something. It is not going to work. Not with me." The accusation struck him with the force of a physical blow. The familiar, sickening surge of rage, hot and acidic, rose in his chest. It was the ultimate insult, the suggestion that his very presence in a place of luxury and privilege must be fraudulent. It was the shadow that had stalked him his entire life. The assumption that a successful black man had to be a cheat, a con artist, a beneficiary of some undeserved handout. "Mrs. Sterling," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "I am not running a scam. I am not looking for a voucher. I am simply a man trying to sit in the seat that he legally purchased. If my existence in this seat threatens your worldview, I assure you, that is your problem, not mine." Her face flushed a blotchy, furious red. She was a cornered animal, unused to being confronted so directly. Her voice rose, no longer a conspiratorial hiss but a public proclamation. "Threatens me? Don't you dare flatter yourself. I am trying to be reasonable, but you are being deliberately obstinate. I have offered you a perfectly simple solution, and your refusal to be flexible tells me everything I need to know about your character." A grim, humorless smile touched Julian's lips. Character. If she wanted to have a discussion about character, he was more than ready. But not here. Not now. Not while she was still blissfully ignorant of the power dynamic she was about to upend. "My character?" he repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "That's a fascinating choice of words. Pray tell, Mrs. Sterling, what does my character have to do with the fact that you are currently trespassing in my assigned seat?" She opened her mouth, a sharp retort on her lips, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, her manicured hand shot up and slammed the flight attendant call button. A soft electronic chime echoed through the tense cabin. It was a declaration of war. "I believe it's time we involved the professionals," she announced, her voice ringing with triumphant certainty. "Clearly, we need someone with actual authority to come and resolve this situation." Julian nodded slowly, his eyes locking with hers. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said, the irony lost on her. "Let's get someone with authority involved. By all means." The approaching footsteps were soft but purposeful, the sound of standard-issue footwear on cheap airline carpet. A moment later, a flight attendant appeared. Her name tag read, Chloe. She was young, maybe 25, with a face that was already etched with the strain of dealing with the public. Her smile was bright, practiced, and utterly devoid of warmth as her eyes darted between Julian and Caroline, taking in the scene with the weary resignation of a seasoned referee. "Good afternoon," Chloe said, her voice a masterclass in forced cheerfulness. "I see we have a bit of a seating discrepancy. How can I help us get this all sorted out?" Caroline immediately seized the narrative, transforming into the aggrieved victim. "Oh, thank you for coming, dear. I'm Caroline Sterling, a Diamond Medallion member. I was just settling into my seat, which I specifically requested, when this gentleman," she said the word as if it were a slur, appeared and began insisting that it belongs to him. It's all been very upsetting." Chloe's gaze flickered to Julian, And in that split second, he saw it. The subtle, almost imperceptible shift. It wasn't overt hostility, but it was a form of prejudice nonetheless. It was the preemptive siding with the person who looked the part. The unconscious bias that saw a wealthy white woman as credible and a black man in a hoodie as a potential problem. "Sir," Chloe said, her smile now visibly strained, "could I please see your boarding pass?" He handed it to her wordlessly. He watched her face as she processed the information, her brow furrowing in confusion as she confirmed that seat 2A was, in fact, assigned to Mr. Julian Vance. "Well," she said, her voice betraying her uncertainty, "it does seem, Mr. Vance, that this seat is assigned to you. However—" She trailed off, glancing nervously at Caroline. "Mrs. Sterling is one of our most valued, long-time customers, and she's already quite comfortable." The familiar knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He had seen this play out 100 times before. The diplomatic language was just a smokescreen for the real message. "Please, don't make a fuss. Please be the one to back down. Please understand that the comfort of our preferred clientele is more important than your actual rights." "What, exactly, are you proposing, Chloe?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Her professional smile wavered. "We do have another lovely seat available, 3C. It's an aisle seat, very spacious. As a gesture of apology for the mix-up, I would be happy to offer you complimentary drinks and Wi-Fi for the duration of the flight." "The mix-up?" Julian repeated, his voice incredulous. "You mean the mix-up where another passenger has stolen my seat and your solution is to inconvenience me?" Sensing her advantage, Caroline pounced. "I think that is a wonderfully generous offer," she declared, "and a very reasonable solution. As I was explaining, I have my belongings arranged, and I have very specific needs for my connecting flight. I'm sure Mr. Vance is a reasonable man who understands the need for a little flexibility." Chloe nodded, visibly relieved. "Mrs. Sterling is right. These things happen from time to time, and we find the best approach is for everyone to work together to find a solution with the least amount of disruption." Julian's eyes swept the first-class cabin. The drama was now in full swing. He saw an older black couple in row 4, watching him with expressions of weary solidarity. They knew this script by heart. In row 3, a sharp-looking Latina woman with a press pass clipped to her lapel was watching with piercing intensity, her phone angled just so. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and he saw a flicker of professional recognition. Near the window in row 5, a young Asian woman was not even trying to hide the fact that she was live-streaming the entire encounter. He could see the glowing red icon in the corner of her screen. "I appreciate your attempt at a solution," Julian said, his gaze returning to Chloe, hard and unyielding. "But my solution is much simpler. I would like to sit in the seat that I paid for, the seat that is printed on my boarding pass, the seat that is currently occupied by that woman." Chloe's composure finally cracked. "Mr. Vance, please, I'm just trying to make sure everyone has a pleasant flight. Mrs. Sterling is one of our most important customers, and I'm not," Julian interrupted, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine. Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She knew there was no right answer. Caroline, however, felt no such constraints. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she scoffed. "This is utterly absurd. I have been flying with Ascendair for 15 years. I spend more on tickets in a single year than you probably make. I know the flight crews, I know the executives, I know how things are supposed to work." She turned her venomous gaze back to Chloe. "I booked this seat. If your computers made an error, that is a problem for the airline to solve, not me. I am settled, and I will not be moving." His phone buzzed insistently. Another text from Anya, this one more frantic. The irony was suffocating. He was receiving urgent messages about the operational status of his own airline, while one of his own employees was telling him to surrender his seat to placate a racist. "Mrs. Sterling," Julian said, his voice now devoid of all warmth. "You keep mentioning how long you've been a customer. Let me ask you a question. In all those years, how many times have you been asked to give up your seat for someone else?" Her eyes flashed. "I'm not being asked to do anything. I am sitting in the seat that I booked." "Except you didn't book this seat," Julian countered calmly. "Because if you had, your boarding pass would say 2A. But it doesn't, does it? So you're not a loyal customer defending her rights. You're a thief, hoping your perceived status will allow you to get away with it." Chloe stepped between them, her hands held up in a placating gesture. "Okay, let's all just take a deep breath. There is no need for inflammatory language. I am sure we can sort this out like adults." "I am not the one who needs to be placated," Julian said, his voice low and steady. "I am simply tired of being treated as if my presence is a problem to be managed." Caroline let out another one of her sharp, ugly laughs. "Your presence? Oh, please. We all know what this is really about. You're putting on a show, hoping to extort some kind of compensation out of the airline. I've seen your type before, and the act is getting old." The accusation hung in the cabin, thick and poisonous. He could feel every eye on him, every passenger waiting to see how he would react to being publicly branded a fraud. He looked from Caroline's sneering face to Chloe's panicked one, then to the silent jury of his fellow passengers. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, so controlled, it was more terrifying than any shout. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." The air in the cabin crackled, the tension shifting from merely uncomfortable to dangerously electric. Caroline Sterling's accusation had been a match thrown on gasoline, and everyone could feel the heat. Chloe, the flight attendant, looked back and forth between them, her face pale with panic. Her conflict resolution script had just gone up in flames. Her hand twitched toward the intercabin phone, but she hesitated, clearly terrified of escalating the situation further. "Perhaps," Chloe stammered, her voice thin and reedy, I should ask Captain Evans to come out. He'll have the final say on how we handle this." A cruel, triumphant smirk spread across Caroline's face. "Yes," she said, practically purring. "An excellent idea. Let's have a man in charge come and explain the proper protocol to Mr. Vance." Julian gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Please do," he said. "I would very much like to speak with someone who has the authority to make a final decision." As Chloe scurried towards the cockpit like a frightened mouse, a new voice, calm and professional, cut through the silence. "Excuse me, I hope you don't mind, but I've been observing this entire exchange." All heads swiveled toward row 3. It was the Latina woman with the press pass. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with intelligent, dark eyes and an air of unshakable confidence. She held up her business card. "My name is Sophia Reyes," she announced, her voice carrying easily through the cabin. "I'm a national correspondent for the New York Times, and I specialize in stories on corporate accountability and civil rights. And I have to say, Mrs. Sterling, your conduct since this gentleman boarded has been, without question, one of the most appalling displays of public bigotry I have ever witnessed." Caroline's jaw dropped. How dare you? This is a private matter." Sophia offered a smile that was all teeth. "Ma'am, when you engage in discriminatory behavior on a commercial airline, it stops being a private matter and becomes a matter of public interest, which is, conveniently, my business. I've documented dozens of incidents just like this one, and the pattern is always depressingly the same. A person of color with a valid ticket is treated as an intruder by a white patron who believes their privilege makes them immune to the rules. From row 5, The young woman who had been live streaming spoke up, her voice clear and confident. For what it's worth, I've got about 5,000 people watching this on my stream right now, and the comment section is, well, let's just say they're not on your side, lady. Caroline spun in her seat to glare at the young woman. You're filming me? That's illegal. I do not give you my consent to be recorded. The young woman, whose name was Maya, shrugged. Actually, under federal law, there's no expectation of privacy in a public space like an airplane cabin. Plus, I'm documenting what I believe to be a civil rights violation in progress. My followers are finding it very educational. A civil rights violation? Caroline sputtered, her face now a furious shade of crimson. This is about a seat. You people are turning this into a circus. The phrase, you people, landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Julian felt something inside him shift, a cold, hard resolve crystallizing in his gut. The anger was gone, replaced by an icy, strategic focus, the same mindset he entered when a hostile takeover was on the line. Sophia Reyes was already typing furiously into her phone. Just to be clear for my records, Mrs. Sterling, did you just use the term you people when referring to those who are questioning your racially charged behavior? Realizing her catastrophic error, Caroline backpedaled frantically. No, that's not what I meant. I meant the media and these social media children. I am not a racist. I have black friends. It was at that moment Julian spoke, his voice cutting through her pathetic defense with the precision of a scalpel. Mrs. Sterling, in the last 10 minutes, you have insinuated I don't belong in this cabin, accused me of running a scam to get a free flight, and now you've deployed the phrase you people to describe the journalist and the citizen, documenting your behavior. If you are not a racist, you are doing a masterful impression of one. How dare you? She shrieked. I donate to the Urban League. I would never... You would never what? Sophia interjected smoothly. Assume a black man in a hoodie is poor? Because you did that. Imply his first-class ticket must be fraudulent. You did that too. Refuse to honor his legitimate boarding pass while asserting your own imagined privilege. You are, in fact, doing that right now. Before Caroline could muster another defense, the imposing figure of Captain Robert Evans appeared at the front of the cabin. He was a man in his late 50s, with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and the weary, authoritative posture of a man who had seen it all. Chloe trailed behind him, looking utterly miserable. Good afternoon, Captain Evans said, his voice the calm, reassuring baritone of a seasoned pilot. I've been told we have a seating issue that's delaying our departure. Let's get this resolved. Caroline was on her feet instantly, her hand extended, her face arranged into a mask of gracious victimhood. Captain, thank you for coming. I'm Caroline Sterling, a Diamond Medallion member. I'm afraid your computers have made some sort of error, and this gentleman is refusing to be reasonable about finding a solution. The captain shook her hand briefly before turning to Julian. And you are, sir? Julian Vance, he replied, making no move to shake his hand, his eyes locked on the captain's. And this is my boarding pass for seat 2A. Mrs. Sterling boarded the plane, saw an empty seat she preferred, and decided to take it. She has refused multiple requests from me and your flight attendant to move. Captain Evans took the boarding pass, his eyes scanning it before glancing around the tense cabin. He was a man who dealt in checklists and procedures, and this messy human drama was clearly an unwelcome deviation. Mr. Vance, I see this is your assigned seat. However, as I'm sure you can appreciate, Mrs. Sterling is one of our most loyal customers. To keep things moving, I'm sure we can find an accommodation that is acceptable to all parties. The familiar wave of disappointment washed over Julian. The captain, the ultimate authority on the aircraft, was choosing the path of least resistance. He was choosing to appease the belligerent white woman rather than enforce his own airline's rules. Captain? Julian asked, his voice flat. "What accommodation do you propose? That I, the person with the correct ticket, should be the one to move so that Mrs. Sterling can have whatever she wants?" Captain Evans shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, as Ms. Chen mentioned, we have other seats available. A little flexibility on everyone's part can go a long way in these situations." Sophia Reyes spoke up again from her seat. "Captain Evans, Sophia Reyes, New York Times. I just want to be clear. Is it the official policy of Ascend Air that a passenger with a valid ticket should relinquish their seat if a higher status passenger decides they want it? Because that sounds like a story my readers would be very interested in." The captain's eyes widened slightly as the full weight of the situation began to dawn on him. A reporter from the New York Times was witnessing and recording all of this. "Ma'am, this is a simple customer service matter, not a policy issue. We are simply trying to make our passengers comfortable." "Comfortable for whom, Captain?" Sophia pressed. "Comfortable for Mrs. Sterling, who has created this conflict, or comfortable for Mr. Vance, who is being asked to surrender his rights to avoid making her uncomfortable?" Maya, the student, held up her phone. "My viewers are asking if this is standard procedure for Ascend Air discrimination complaints. We're at over 10,000 viewers now, and someone just started the hashtag #NotOgiAscendAirShame. Oh wow, it's starting to trend." Captain Evans looked around the cabin as if seeing it for the first time. The phones, the watching eyes, the journalist taking notes. This was no longer a simple dispute. It was a full-blown public relations catastrophe unfolding in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you, Ascend Air has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. We are simply trying to find an amicable resolution." Julian took a slow step forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the cabin. "Captain Evans," he said, his voice now carrying an edge of command that was impossible to ignore. "Let's be perfectly clear. Mrs. Sterling is in my seat without a valid ticket. She has refused to move. Your flight attendant suggested I move. You have now endorsed that same suggestion. At what point does this stop being a customer service matter and start being what it actually is, enabling racial discrimination?" The captain's mouth opened, but Julian held up a hand. "I'm not done. Mrs. Sterling has publicly accused me of fraud, suggested I don't belong here, and used racially coded language. This has all been witnessed and recorded. So, I will ask you one more time, Captain. Is it Ascend Air policy to tell a black passenger to give up his seat to an entitled white woman to keep the peace?" The silence that followed was absolute. The captain was trapped, publicly, with no good answer. It was Caroline who broke the spell, her voice a shrill shriek of desperation. "This is preposterous. I will not be lectured by someone who probably got his ticket with frequent flyer miles from a credit card. People who truly belong in first class don't dress like they're heading to a skate park." The insult, so naked and ugly, sucked the remaining air out of the cabin. Sophia was typing at lightning speed. "Mrs. Sterling, for the record, did you just imply that Mr. Vance could not have legitimately purchased his own ticket? And did you just link his attire to his right to be in this cabin?" Caroline knew she had gone too far, but like a cornered animal, she lashed out again. "I'm just saying that there are standards. People who belong here understand how to behave." Julian looked at her, then at the captain, then at the shocked faces of the other passengers. When he spoke, his voice was calm, collected, and absolutely terrifying. "Captain Evans," he said, "I am now ordering you to return this aircraft to the gate. Ground this flight immediately." A stunned silence fell over the cabin, followed by a ripple of confused murmurs. Captain Evans blinked, as if he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, sir, did you just order me to ground the plane?" "I didn't ask," Julian replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I told you. Take this plane back to the gate. We are not departing until this is resolved to my satisfaction." Caroline Sterling let out a derisive snort. "Oh, this is priceless. Now he thinks he's the CEO of the airline. What's next? Are you going to demand a pilot's uniform?" The captain looked genuinely bewildered. He was a man of protocols and checklists, and nowhere in his flight manual was there a procedure for a passenger ordering him to ground the plane. "Mr. Vance, I understand your frustration, but you have no authority to make operational decisions for this aircraft." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Captain," he said, "I'm about to make one phone call. I suggest you, Mrs. Sterling, and everyone else pay very close attention." Sophia Reyes leaned forward, her reporter's instincts screaming that the story was about to take a dramatic turn. Maya repositioned her phone, her viewer count now skyrocketing past 20,000 as the hashtag #AscendAirShame exploded across Twitter. Julian didn't make a call. Instead, he tapped open an app the other passengers didn't recognize. It had a clean, minimalist interface with the Ascend Air logo at the top, below which were a series of buttons and real-time data streams. Fleet status, on-time performance, and, most ominously, executive override. What is that?" Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Julian's thumb hovered over a large red button labeled Ground Flight, CEO Directive. "This, Ms. Chen," he said, his voice resonating through the silent cabin, "is the master control panel for the entire Ascend Air global fleet. And this," he pressed the button, "is what happens when you push the wrong man too far." A confirmation screen popped up. "Are you sure you wish to ground Flight 928? He tapped yes. The screen flashed. "Flight 928, Austin, Ayu, gets grounded by owner directive. Return to gate B12 immediately." Almost instantly, the captain's radio crackled to life, the voice from air traffic control sharp and urgent. "Ascend 928. This is Austin Tower. We are showing a Priority 1 CEO override on your flight plan. Confirm your status. You are instructed to return to gate B12 immediately. I repeat, return to the gate immediately." Captain Evans stared at his radio console, as if it had spoken in an alien tongue. He looked at Julian, his face a mask of disbelief, then back at the console. "Tower, this is Ascend 928. Can you please repeat that traffic? Did you say CEO override?" "That is affirmative, Ascend 928, the radio squawked back. "We are showing a direct command from the EtherTech corporate headquarters to ground your aircraft. Your takeoff clearance is revoked. Taxi back to gate B12. Caroline Sterling's face had drained of all color. She looked from Julian's calm expression to the captain's stunned one. What was that? What did you just do?" Julian slipped his phone back into his pocket. His eyes, cold and unforgiving, settled on her. "Mrs. Sterling, please allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Julian Vance. I am the founder and CEO of EtherTech. 3 years ago, my company acquired a 65% controlling stake in Ascend Air's parent corporation. So you see, I don't just have a ticket for this seat. I own this seat. I own this plane. I own this entire goddamn airline." The silence that descended upon the first-class cabin was so profound, so absolute, that the gentle hum of the auxiliary power unit sounded like a roaring engine. Every passenger, every crew member, stared at Julian Vance as if he had just sprouted wings. The black man in the hoodie was not a problem to be managed. He was the king, and they were all standing in his throne room. Sophia Reyes was the first to find her voice, and it was filled with the electric thrill of a journalist who had just stumbled upon the story of the decade. "You're that Julian Vance? The one from the cover of Wired? The man who built the world's most advanced logistics AI from his garage?" Julian gave a slight nod. "The very same." "And Mrs. Sterling," he continued, his voice dripping with ice. Since you were so concerned about my qualifications for being in this cabin, you might be interested to know that the Ether Tech software I designed is the same software that runs Ascend Air's entire reservation system, the check-in kiosks you used in the terminal, and the passenger manifest that Captain Evans has been pretending to consult for the last 20 minutes. Caroline's mouth worked silently, like a beached fish gasping for air. But you're dressed so... I mean, you look like a... Like a what, Mrs. Sterling? Julian finished for her, his voice soft but lethal. Like a man who couldn't possibly belong in your world. Like a man whose success must be a mistake, a fraud, a charity case. Captain Evans stood frozen, the color draining from his face as he processed the catastrophic reality. He had just spent the last half hour patronizing and attempting to displace the majority owner of the company that signed his paychecks. His radio crackled again, this time the voice of a panicked operations manager. Captain Evans, this is Ascend Ops. Return to the gate now. We have corporate executives en route to meet the aircraft. All passengers are to remain on board. Chloe, the flight attendant, looked as if she was about to faint. Mr. Vance, sir, I had no idea. I was only trying to... You were trying to solve a problem by asking the black man to be accommodating, Julian finished for her, his tone weary rather than angry. I know, Ms. Chen. It's the path of least resistance. You've been trained to identify the person in any conflict who seems to have the least social capital and ask them to sacrifice their rights for the comfort of the person who seems to have the most. It's a flawed system. Maya's phone was now a blur of notifications, her live stream having gone supernova. Holy crap, she whispered, her eyes wide. We just passed 100,000 viewers. The Washington Post and CNN just retweeted my link. Caroline finally managed to speak, her voice a pathetic, broken croak. I didn't know. If I had known who you were... And that, Sophia Reyes interjected, her pen flying across her notepad, is the entire point, isn't it? You treated him with contempt because you didn't know who he was. The issue isn't your failure to recognize a CEO. It's your failure to recognize a fellow human being's dignity. Julian's phone buzzed. It was Anya. Julian, what in God's name is happening? The internet is on fire. Something about you grounding a flight at AUS. The board is in full-blown panic. Call me now. He ignored the call, instead typing a quick reply. Handle all media. Draft a statement on systemic discrimination in air travel. This is no longer a customer service issue. It's a corporate restructuring. As the 737 began its slow, humiliating taxi back toward the terminal, Julian looked at the stunned faces around him. Shock, embarrassment, and on a few, the dawning excitement of being a first-hand witness to history. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian announced, his voice carrying through the cabin with the effortless authority of a man born to lead. I want you all to understand that what happened here today was never about a seat. It was about a mindset. It was about what happens every single day to people who look like me, in spaces where we are not expected. Mrs. Sterling saw a black man and assumed he didn't belong. Mrs. Chen saw a conflict and assumed the black man should be the one to compromise. Captain Evans saw a delay and assumed the easiest solution was to appease the valued customer at the expense of the man she was discriminating against. The plane docked at the gate with a gentle bump. Through the window, Julian could see a crowd forming on the jet bridge. Airport officials, stern-faced executives in suits, and the unmistakable silhouettes of news cameras. Every single assumption made today was based on nothing more than the color of my skin and the clothes I wear, Julian continued, his voice resonating with moral clarity. And that is a bug in the system that I am now personally going to fix. I will make sure that this kind of casual, entitled bigotry never, ever happens again on any airline that I own. Tears were now streaming down Caroline Sterling's face, carving paths through her expensive foundation. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. I truly had no idea." Julian's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "That is the problem, Mrs. Sterling. You didn't know who I was, so you felt you had permission to treat me as less. The crime wasn't that you disrespected a CEO. The crime was that you disrespected a man, assuming he had no power to fight back. You just happened to be wrong." The cabin door opened. As Julian stood and collected his backpack, the other passengers remained silent, watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. "Captain Evans, Miss Chen," Julian said as he moved toward the exit. "We will be having a long conversation very soon. Mrs. Sterling, my legal department will be in touch to inform you of your lifetime ban from all Ascend Air flights and affiliates." He paused at the door, turning back to face the cabin one last time. "And for everyone else who watched this unfold, thank you. Your phones, your attention, your refusal to look away. That is the only reason this story will be told. The most powerful weapon against injustice is to bear witness." With that, Julian Vance stepped off his own airplane and into the blinding flash of camera lights, leaving behind a cabin full of people who had just learned a very public, very expensive lesson about the hidden cost of prejudice.